Welcome back to What the Fact. I'm Katie and this is Aaron.
The fate of the Senate could very well hinge on what happens in the state of Missouri on November 6th. That's where Democrat Claire McCaskill is seeking a third term against the Republican Attorney General in that state, Josh Hawley. This is a state that Donald Trump won by 19 percentage points in 2016 and has been trending more and more red. Republicans really see it as a place where they can pick up a seat and actually expand their majority in the Senate. Josh Hawley was just elected to the state Attorney General's position in 2016. He began running for the Senate kind of almost a year later after that election, and really has become the GOP's top hope to take over for McCaskill in the Senate.
So we don't have a lot of polling in this state, but what we do know shows a neck-and-neck race, certainly within the margin of error. Hawley and McCaskill have been meeting for debates, and we've actually fact-checked one all out. Their most recent meeting. We were there to fact check their claims, so let's check in with the Truth-O-Meter and see the factual state of the race.
It's down to the wire in the state of Missouri, where Democrat Claire McCaskill is trying to cling to her Senate seat. That's likely produced some sleepless nights, because Republican State Attorney General Josh Hawley is giving her a tough fight. He's barely beating her in the polls. During a debate in St. Louis earlier this month, each candidate made some claims that need some fact-checking. We'll look at a couple. First, there's this from McCaskill.
Wages are stagnant. In fact, wages are 1.8% lower in this country than they were a year ago.
Not according to the government. The Bureau of Labor Statistics released new data showing wages increased in the first 3 quarters of 2018. McCaskill seems to be referencing a number from the Pay Scale Index, which is a private firm with now outdated information. Other Democrats have pushed that number too as a rebuke of the Republican-backed tax cuts, but experts say it's a statistical outlier. The BLS numbers likely give us a much more accurate picture of what wages are doing. Then there's this from Hawley about Senator McCaskill.
She voted no on the tax cut. She wants to reverse it and raise your taxes, raise middle-class taxes.
McCaskill did, in fact, oppose that tax cut package. She said she did that because it disproportionately benefited wealthy folks. She has not called for a full repeal or raising taxes on the middle class. In fact, she said she wants to keep intact the parts of the tax cut law that help middle-class families. Getting the facts straight will be hugely important for Missouri voters. That race is a tight one and a key one. It could easily go either way in a Senate with a slim Republican majority.
All right, Katie, so that's a couple claims from the debate. Why don't we go through a couple more? Why don't you start with a couple claims from Josh Hawley and see how they fared?
Okay, sure. Hawley said that McCaskill takes more money than anybody in Congress from the insurance industry except for one other liberal. PolitiFact Missouri had actually looked into that before and found it was largely accurate. We were using numbers from opensecrets.org, which is run by the Center for Responsive Politics, a very reliable source. He's trying to say she's a hypocrite on healthcare because she takes so much donations from the insurance industry. It's really important to remember that this is based on all insurance companies, which actually encompass other industries, so not just healthcare.
Property insurance, things like that, life insurance. So,
auto, yes.
Yeah, things that wouldn't really have to do with health insurance. Yeah.
Okay. Hawley also had another statement that was kind of like a blast from the past for us fact-checking old-timers. Took us right back to 2012. He said
She voted to cut $716 billion from Medicare in order to pay for Obamacare.
Now, we checked approximately 1 jillion variations of this statement back in 2012. It was kind of like the big one. And it is an exaggeration. Now, depending on how it was phrased, it was either half true or mostly false. This claim is way too sweeping. It makes it sound like you're going to take money from benefits in order to pay for Obamacare, which is kind of a more negative connotation than Medicare. But the claim is way too sweeping, and again, that implication about taking away future benefits isn't true. We've been skeptical of these claims in the past, and here's what's kind of happening. Medicare spending is continuing to rise, but the cuts that were part of the Affordable Care Act meant that it would climb at a slower pace than what it would have climbed without the Affordable Care Act. And the future reductions in spending targeted reductions to healthcare providers, so not patient benefits themselves. So it was really affecting more hospitals and insurance companies. So anyway, thanks for the blast from the past, Josh Hawley, but the statement was imprecise. Why don't you take us from some fact checks of McCaskill?
We'll do a couple. McCaskill has tried to really talk about conservative stances in a couple of cases to try to kind of win over voters in a pretty red state of Missouri.
I have certainly voted and worked on a bill that would have given $25 billion towards border security.
That is technically accurate. McCaskill did support a proposal that would have provided $25 billion towards border funding, essentially potentially wall funding. The important thing to note, though, is that was a Democrat bill that essentially was trying to give a path to citizenship for dreamers. So really, it really had no chance of going anywhere, and McCaskill probably knew that when she cast her ballot. Another one I kind of want to highlight here is a kind of a back and forth between Hawley and McCaskill. Hawley said McCaskill voted with Chuck Schumer 90% of the time. McCaskill fired right back saying, I voted with President Trump 50% of the time. This is an interesting case when both people are basically right. That if you look in 2017-2018, McCaskill voted with the Democratic Party and Chuck Schumer about 80% of the time. But if you look in the most recent years, McCaskill voted actually with Trump's position 58% of the time on certain votes in 2017. So basically, there's this is a kind of a good news for everyone, right? You can look into it and say she sided with Chuck Schumer, she sided with President Trump. It kind of shows it's kind of Rorschach test. You can see what you want to see in it.
Thanks so much for joining us. That's going to do it for this week's edition of What the Fact. Until next week, I'm Katie, and this is Erin. Have a great one.